Hello and welcome to week 9 in sociology. Sorry, not sociology, social psychology. I just did the sociology one, a little confused. But here we are talking about chapters 16 and 17. They're closely related. We look at chapter 16, conformity and obedience, and then we look at persuasion and have some interesting things for you to do. So conformity and obedience, it's really hard to teach a psychology class and not get into the way that I introduced this chapter. And huge part of the chapter itself, I did the course book stuff before I even looked at the textbook. So it's interesting that the textbook had all that stuff about Stanley Milgram's study. But Stanley Milgram's shock experiments were ingrained into my head from almost the first day that I took Introduction to Psychology in my own college career. It was one of the maverick studies that came along and not only revealed important qualities of human nature, not only revealed the issues related to how you communicate results and how the entire study was not published, and there's all kinds of other variables that were manufactured and manipulated in the experiment that changed the overall picture of the results. We're really pretty much presented with one set of results as opposed to multiple sets of results. But also, very importantly, it marks a period in psychological history where the American Psychological Association had to take a really close look about how people are treated when they're subjected to being a subject in experimental studies. Because you see, as Milgram did his study and had individuals come in and play the role of a teacher, and everybody else was in on it. You can read up on how he did this study, but the teacher was the subject, the person that was the teacher who was asking the questions. And then when the individual answered the question wrong, he would flick a switch and it would presumably deliver an electric shock. The idea was that the Yale University professors were studying the influence of punishment on learning. Sounds like it makes sense. The thing is, though, is the shocks were fake. Nobody was ever getting shocked, and the individual was play acting the sounds, or they're using recordings of sounds and whatever of shocking. And they said, well, how many, as they progress to more and more vigorous shocks, how far will people go? Now, way more people went further than anybody suspected, and you can read about those results in the resources that I gave you. But one of the sad side effects is that the individuals who participated in this study were traumatized by it. They thought they were really hurting somebody, and in some cases, they delivered the shocks to the point that they thought the person was killed. And the debriefing was inadequate. It was like, thanks for your participation. See, the researchers knew nobody was dead, but the individual walked out of the lab going, did I just kill somebody? The number of individuals who ended up in therapy because of that is pretty profound. And there's still, to this day, a gathering of the surviving members who participated in that study. They get together on an annual basis and meet and talk about it. And so this and a couple other studies are largely the reason why we now have a code of ethics that dictates how we deal with human subjects in research studies. So, from all this, though, we got some very, very interesting things, and that is how does our environment influence our thinking and our behavior? And largely what we have to recognize is, first and foremost, we are adapting beings. When we find ourselves in unfamiliar situations, we are quick to look around, determine what's the status quo, and blend in. Particularly for unfamiliar, because then we don't know what the rules are. We don't know what's going to happen if you disobey the rules. So at least for the beginning, we're going to play along. And I could demonstrate that in class, and I have several times. And I've had students come in. We're going to talk about obedience and conformity and stuff like that. And I'll have them come in and I'll say, okay, everybody line up against the wall. We're going to do an activity. Everybody lines up against the wall. Said everybody raise your right hand and then get up on one foot, and I want you to hop 3 times. And they all do it. And inside I'm thinking, there is no one here that is questioning my authority, and they believe I have some sort of plan. I don't. Well, other than demonstrating the ability that someone like myself, in the role of a teacher, can certainly get students to do a lot of bizarre things in class for absolutely no reason at all. And then I have them all sit down, and I ask them, I say, why did you do all that? What? And it's incredibly rare. It's probably happened once. I have, some what are you doing? Just maybe catching on to something here. Maybe they read a little ahead. They don't want to be talking about obedience or something like that. But probably, but save for that one person in 20 years of teaching, I don't think I've ever had anybody who simply didn't do it. They just did it. And so this sense of, I'm going to go along with this is very, very profoundly built into our psychology. It's not a weak mind. It's I don't want to cause trouble. This person's in authority, and I'm just going to go along. And that's really what Milgram was trying to study. The effect of power figures or authority figures being able to manipulate others. And we get into power and authority and what that means. And so the book goes into defining those, what is power? The ability to manipulate resources. And then what is authority? It's the legitimate power. It's authority is there's some sort of social contract or some role that somebody has, and they are bequeathed that power, and it's agreed upon by the group. We may fight it, but we're fighting not just the individual, but we're fighting the establishment of the legitimacy of that particular power that makes it an authority. So legitimizing power comes about in our society through voting and delegation and social structures and particular kinds of jobs and oaths of office and all of these things. These are ways in which we delegate legitimate power or authority to individuals. And in our society, we're looking at some of those things. What are the powers of people in authority? What are the powers of the police? Are they being abused? Are the powers being abused targeting individuals? And taking a close look at that, when we look at our government officials, do they have the authority to do that kind of thing? Just in when we went into the COVID lockdown, and it impacted all of the social organizations, including the church that I go to. There was rumbles of, as there are in many evangelical circles of, the government's trying to restrict religion, and stuff like that. And the elders of my church, they published I'll post it. They published this really great document talking about the Constitution of Maine and what legitimate authority does the governor have, that it's only when particular religious organizations are targeted that it becomes an issue of civil rights and, the Bill of Rights and stuff like this. And an eloquent treatment of this very issue, a civics lesson basically in the legitimate authority of organizations such as the government to impact the practices of people in the state. So it's extremely well done and kind of, calmed the waters on that particular thing. So we also have other areas. We select individuals who we place in authority. We put them in our looking glass self committee. They have, and that's real power. And we legitimize it. We say, yeah, I put you there. Hopefully you have the ability to take them out or reduce their power, or control their power. A person's charisma, they're kind of go-gettingness. And then things like social currency that I put in there that include legitimate credentials, experience, particular value systems, that things that we value and say that's associated with authority. And then I throw in a little video because of charisma, possibly some social currency, poor choices in our looking glass self, and all that stuff that that sometimes we get led astray. And one of the movements, I guess, that are happening in our society right now is a delegitimizing of science. Principally because of a misunderstanding about what science means. I mean, science has always been, probably a bad marketing, has always been, science is certainty. This kind of goes in the video that I give you. Science is this is the way it works, add this, mathematics, 1 + 1 is always 2. And so, but in truth, science really doesn't work that way. Science works with uncertainty all the time. In fact, proofs are rare in science. But unless you are in the field of science and understand that, and one of the things that has been happening over the last few years is that the finding of science has been contrary to social practice. Issues such as our continued reliance on fossil fuels, the environmental collapse and global warming and climate change and those kinds of things, the endangering of species, the burning of the rainforest, those kind of things. Science is ringing a bell, but it's not a convenient bell. It's not the bell that says we're going to the moon, which is really cool. It's the bell that says maybe we have to change our behavior, and that's being challenged. But it's not that it's being challenged in the field of science. These things are fairly well established and have been established for decades. It's being challenged in the court of public opinion through a delegitimizing of science. Like, okay, so you're a PhD. What do you know about this? A lot, actually. That's how I got the PhD, And to tell you the truth, I've actually experienced some of this myself, where I've been in discussions, and I don't consider myself a world authority about very much, but I've been in discussions where, let's say, to tell you the truth, I'm a world authority on the design of online learning, and it's something I know a lot about. It's something I do a lot and whatever. And I've been in some discussions with individuals who have come to me for some advice, let's say, and when I'm talking about things, they're like, well, no, I don't think that's true, or, it's this, and it's like, well, I'm the doctor, and you certainly have a right to this, this not being true or something like that. But there's, when I go to my doctor, I'm relying on them to, kind of lay it down for me, and they're the authority. And not that you shouldn't question that anytime, but certainly we're getting into the habit of maybe questioning the wrong people, particularly when we get into, well, this individual is this is a person who has that legitimate, social valued, social currency, but this individual is very charismatic and they're saying what I like, so I'm going to go with them. That is dangerous, and that's what that video sort of gets into. And so that leads us into the end of this chapter. In the discussion, I want you to talk about conformity in social media. Specifically in social media, are we more likely to conform, or maybe we're more likely to act out? And, kind of thing. How do you feel that that's working, And then in the quiz, privately, I'm asking you to reflect on the anti-science movement video that I gave you right at the end of this chapter. So that brings us to the end of this particular chapter. And as I change the book here and go into chapter 17, and I put that full screen. Here at chapter 17, persuasion. And I'm going to warn you, in the attention-getting section is a pretty straightforward political ad, and I'm including. I thought it was hilarious. It's it's meant to be comedy, but it's also meant to be serious in terms of how people think about the upcoming election. It is optional. And so it's not my job to tell you how to vote or how to think about these things. But I think it's an interesting video that talks about when for many people, just sometimes decisions can be so clear it befuddles us, whereas some people might still be on the fence. So that's kind of what the video is poking fun at. It's not meant to be disturbing or humiliating to anybody, but certainly worthy of a good view and hopefully a good laugh on top of that. So as we are in chapter 17, we're talking about how we get persuaded. And one of the first things that we have to recognize right off is you can be persuaded. I can be persuaded. Because the science that has gone into creating the methods of persuasion is amazing science. When I'm teaching the history of psychology, it's actually interesting that American psychology has a very different history, obviously much newer, but very different history than European psychology. Now, it was the way that if you wanted to study psychology, you might start off in a philosophy degree here in the States, but then eventually you would have to go over to Europe and study psychology there because that's where psychology was really happening, mostly in Germany. So you would come back from that and you would establish yourself, very different world of psychology. Not, there weren't psychologists. That wasn't around yet. There weren't therapists and stuff like that. So psychologists were people who studied the mind. These were academic positions. But they were few and far between because America's pragmatic. Very different than Europe. So Americans like, well, what's the use of that? Why do we have to understand people? I just want them to do my work, or I just want them to do this. We just need good labor. Very, very pragmatic sense of what's the use of science. So sciences like biology, geology, chemistry, physics, and all that, there's lots of good gigs for that because those had practical applications. And psychology struggled to get a footing. One of the areas that they ventured into, having to do, when mass production of products became available, there was a need to communicate with potential customers as to your product. And when factory A is making a soap, and factory B is making a soap, and factory A wants to convince buyers of factory B to switch over, they have to convince them, they have to persuade them to make a change in their behavior. Buying behavior. Buying and purchasing began being recognized as a human behavior. And the mechanisms inside that allow us to choose one product or another were the product of cognitive psych, perception, feelings, these kinds of things. Once that was recognized, psychologists turned it on and created the world that we now know of as advertising. So advertising is a product of American psychology. Of course, it's worldwide now, but so the notion of influencing people's ideas about products, people's ideas about ideas, people's ideas about candidates, people's ideas about social policy, people's ideas about history are really, really based on the rock-hard science of psychology that was looking in Europe, looking at perception, thinking, processing, feelings, and all that stuff, the human experience, but then applying it to something pragmatic. So a lot of psychologists made a lot of good money doing advertising. And so in terms of advertising, in terms of how do we persuade somebody, not only in advertising, but let's say I'm trying to persuade, like teaching is kind of a persuasion game. I may present something to you that is contrary to your beliefs, and I need to convince you. I may have social merit. I might have the social currency. Well, I'm an expert on it. You're not, so take my word on it. And off we go to the races. But for some of you, it might mean more than, show me the data, show me the proof of this, show me why this is true. There might more and more need for persuasion. Now, the direct path is basically the essential argument that you see within coursework. That you have an expert on the stage, they're presenting what they know, they're looking at the evidence, they're saying this is what the science, these are the conclusions, this is what we're coming to, and that's our vision of the world. And that kind of, we can have a discussion about methodology, we can talk interpretation of results and stuff, but we're locked within that sort of logical way in which we're moving someone from a position of relative not knowing to a position of knowing and changing their mind in that way. Advertising, however, does that. It will say factual information and use logic and all that, but most often using peripheral ways in which to move us in ways that may or may not be related to the actual content of the ad. So putting particular images associated with products, that classical conditioning that we talk about at Intro Psych, when we take a beautiful woman and we pair them with a product, and the beautiful woman elicits emotions within the observer. Those emotions are then paired with the relatively innocuous stimulus of the product, and pretty soon the emotions are attached to the product. Not literally in the way like, oh, I feel attracted to the bottle, like I'm attracted to the model, but but there's that sense of connection that's made, and it happens very quickly inside of the cognitive experience of an ad. So this not only became practice, it became an art and a science. And we know that advertising works because advertisers spend a lot of money doing it. They, millions of dollars going into advertising to sell products, and you wonder, that's a lot of money. They're still doing it, so there must be, businesses by and large don't throw their money away. So they must be working. And so silly commercials or commercials that have a storyline, Budweiser's pretty famous for their storyline. Right around Christmas, maybe last year or the year before, they had that little dog. And then, of course, Budweiser had the frogs. Some of you might not remember this. And then before that, there was Spud McKenzie, another little dog. And all of these were storylines that went on for years, where you were following the life of a dog or the life of frogs or whatever through the storyline, which was an advertisement for beer. And so, interesting approach to that. Now, we're not robots, because there's this notion that when we use peripheral methodologies to persuade, that it elicits an automatic response. Just like in that classical conditioning, when for men, you put that scantily clad, beautiful woman in them, and the emotional response is not something that the person has to think about. It's automatic. So they see that, and there's a certain emotional response. It may not be lust. It might just be, oh, there's an attractive woman. It attracts my attention, puts my eyes on the ad, and it gets paired with the product. It's sort of automatic. And the use of particular terms and images and whatnot, I go a little bit into the course book about using terms like, just say right now, before I wrote the chapter, I was looking at political ads, and I heard terms like socialist, racist, pedophile, economic collapse, un-American, liar, rapist, and criminal being used in political ads. These are extremely powerful, provocative words that for individuals will elicit incredibly strong feelings about that. And then those become associated with the images. True or not, it really doesn't matter. I mean, let's face it, there's nothing really attractive about a bottle of beer. It's the model. So it's the association of those things that creates that connection, and then we then associate, let's say, that candidate with that word, and that is the way that mechanism works. Now I go into the field, the theory of the triad of trustworthiness. How do we establish authority, which we kind of talked about in the last chapter. Honesty, what does that mean? And likability, and when somebody has all of that, they have trustworthiness. Or if a company has that kind of thing, I went into some companies, like say brand names actually have those things. That's why they're brand names. So if you think so for me, Apple, something's Apple, to me there's a whole halo of things going along with that in terms of quality of manufacturing, the user experience and stuff like that I pretty much presume will be part of everything that they make. Nike sneakers, Levi's, anything like that. Name one of those great. They become household names because of that experience. And then what we see, the indirect routes that we have of associating. First, we have that halo effect of beautiful people, beautiful products, trustworthy people, all of that. And then we have all these methodologies that we use to increase trustworthiness, to make things likable, to make them honest, and to place them in positions of authority. And I list them out. So we have testimonials, presenting something as an education, but it's actually an ad, word of mouth, the maven, person on the inside being proselytizing the particular idea, giving free gifts. So you owe me. If I give you something, you owe me. This is great. It's that, how many times have you ever been invited into something, we'll give you something for free if you listen to our sales pitch. I've been on vacation and got roped into this presentation on timeshares. Holy, way too much time, way too much of a sales thing. I'm really not good at dealing with that. And, but I got like a free towel, or something like that, if we're going to listen to it. So there's that. There's reciprocity, social proof, which means everybody's doing it. Commitment and consistency, door in the face. I'm gonna throw it all at you. Then I'm gonna say, okay, how about I do this? But this is what I was shooting for anyway. I gave you too much, and then now I'm gonna pull back and kind of bring you in that way. There's the one more thing, or that's not all. You also get this. The sunk cost trap, I've already put some money in, can't really take it out now. And then the image of scarcity, like. There's only, say on the shopping network, they had that clock that's meaningless. Absolutely meaningless. So is like, there's only 12 of these left. Meaningless. That is all just to get you to think, wow, there's only 12 more of these. I only have 15 minutes to call, to get that impulse to act right then. First and foremost, we recognize that we are influenced by these things. When we think something is going to be scarce, look what happened with toilet paper. There was no scarcity of toilet paper. That was a manufactured scarcity. I wouldn't be surprised if we found out that it was actually a message that was embedded into social media by the toilet paper industry. What a great way to sell out of toilet paper. Make great sales. There's probably people still using their stash. And so they, that kind of thing, it really, really does affect people. So we educate ourselves from reliable sources. We recognize that we are vulnerable. And finally, you can immunize ourselves by preparing ourselves for kind of like what we'll experience when we have these discussions. Now, I want to go into the assignments because I created this assignment and I'm a little excited about it. Now, the quiz is, I want you to talk about it. I talk about it in the course book. How do fixed action patterns influence voting? And I go into that a little bit in terms of party recognition and party affiliation and stuff. So it's just sort of regurgitating that. The assignment, however, is a little bit more involved. So the assignment, what I want you to be able to do is I want you to find 6 ads They can be video ads where you get the link to the video, or you can get an image or whatever. I want you to find an ad that demonstrates the direct path, testimonials, messages education, reciprocity, social proof, and scarcity. I want you to find 6 different ads that recognize that. Here's my little twist on it. We're in election season, so I want 2 of those to be political ads for candidates currently running for office. State, national, local, don't care. But something specific that represents one of those, a testimonial from somebody, let's say to support a candidate, or even a message on education, where there's an education about, this is the reality and this is why you have to, that appeal, that kind of appeal. Social proof, this is what everybody's doing. This is what, that you're looking for that. I want 2 of the ads. They can all be political if you want, but at least 2 of them need to be political ads currently going on. I want you to be able to analyze those. Challenge yourself even to look at other candidates, to be critical of your own candidate maybe. That'd be fun, just to look at what your own candidate is doing. You don't have to change your vote, but recognize that we all do this. They all do this sort of negative campaigning sometimes. That's there. And you create a document, title page. You got the 6 examples, and you explain. You describe the category, like say this is a direct path, and tell me what direct path means, and then describe the element in the ad that is specifically aligned to that category. Like, why is it a direct path? Why is it a testimonial? I know that's obvious. Write it out. And then the desired results. And by desired results, I don't mean the sale of a product or the vote. What I'm talking about is, what are they trying to elicit through this? So testimonial, what is the legitimacy of the person who's giving the testimony? For example, what are they trying to, they're trying to connect, be analytical about this and say, okay, they're trying to make this a better ad because of this person's qualities, or to get into that piece with this analysis and really kind of dig into this. I think this will be kind of fun to kind of look at these ads and really think a little deeper and think about the psychology behind them. Not only will you discover and utilize all this information, but you are also inoculating yourself. You are preparing for the fact that you are exposed to so many ads, and we don't want to be robots. So I'm looking forward to seeing these assignments from you. Take care.